Welcome to the Out of the Pulpit podcast. I'm Pastor Scott, and to my right is Pastor Mike, but on your screens, it's to your left, which is fun to think about.
This is already off the rails.
Already. While we're off the rails, let's have a little bit of fun before we get started.
Okay.
Mike, are you ready?
Nope.
Here we go.
Am.
So you are a kind of a space nerd.
Sure.
So I would like you to rank, along with our listeners at this time, they're going to be thinking about this as they're listening, watching, the weight of our planets in order, starting with largest going to smallest.
So the Earth is the densest.
But the weight, the overall weight.
Oh, I don't know.
In terms of kilograms. Or pounds.
We'll put Mercury last.
I'm wanting to go what's the heaviest?
I know. I'm doing it random in the order I feel comfortable with, Scott.
Our listeners are confused now.
Mercury is the lightest.
Okay, let's go lightest to the heaviest then.
Okay. After that, I'm going to guess...
You're right, by the way.
Venus?
You said Mars. Good job.
Okay, so it's Mars.
Yep.
Is Venus after Mars?
Yep.
Okay. And then, well, so I don't know. I know Earth's the densest, but it's not going to be the heaviest.
You should follow the instinct of saying that planet next.
Yeah, Earth.
Okay, so you got Mercury. Why did I say Mercury?
I don't know. You're illiterate.
You say it.
Mercury,
Mars,
Venus, Earth.
Now you only got 4 left because remember Pluto doesn't count anymore.
It does count.
Never. Pluto's dead to us.
I'm gonna go Uranus.
Well done.
Okay.
Well done.
Like Neptune or Saturn, and then Jupiter. Oh my gosh, Neptune.
Well done. Okay. You're going to go for perfection without any misses.
And then Jupiter, Saturn? Or do I have to flip them? Yeah. Okay. Dang.
You're close.
Yeah.
The weights: Mercury, Mars, Venus, Earth, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter.
There you go.
Well done. You're
amazing.
Much better than an average 5th grader, at least.
I know. I'm so sorry.
6th grader, not sure.
I'm sorry, America.
I think it's important to realize as we get into today's topic on addiction recovery, this is a big segue, that we are obsessed with ranking and comparing things like planets' weights. And as we talk about a very sensitive topic today with some seriousness, that we are not sharing these items with recovery in terms of trying to compare myself better or worse than another person. And it's that shadow side that we sometimes feel either inadequate or we feel somehow that I have to compensate for myself and my history and all sorts of other things that were beyond our control, our upbringing, our biochemistry, all these things. And so I want to bring up that while we can have fun comparing planet sizes when we're sharing today's episode, there are a lot of things that are not confidential because we're sharing this on a public podcast, but it is definitely things we do not want to.
This is being recorded?
Yes, it is. But it is things that we, in all seriousness, want to hold with tenderness and with care, and not use it as a kind of a weapon of comparison. And I often will share in counseling that most of the issues in the ways in which we are tempted to sin is when we start comparing myself with another, my marriage to another, my spouse to another, my whatever, my dogs, my cats, my money. That's my belongings. That's comparison is a root of a lot of sinful behavior. So we're no better or worse than any one of us, and we are no better or worse than anyone out there. We are all moving towards Jesus at our center as we've been doing at church.
Yeah.
So with that long segue in mind, Mike, share me a little bit about, as you'd like to share, your story of addiction recovery.
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? Well, I was born, and when I was born, I was this many. Now, I think it's interesting because I grew up in the 90s through early aughts and got wrapped up into the kind of revival, the punk revival of the late 90s, and that actually ended up being very positive because straight edge became a very popular thing. So I actually did not dabble in any of this stuff really until after high school. And then I remember I went on a trip to Ireland and backpacked Ireland when I was 18 in between high school and college. And I had beer for the first time, had my first drink. And it was like every single like light on the switchboard turned on all at once. It was like, I hear it often said in rooms that I didn't know I needed a drink on the car ride to preschool, but I did, right?
Right.
And that was
That's
kind
good.
of it. Just like an immediate response that I've come to realize is not how other people respond to these kind of substances. And I mean, without getting into all the dirty details, I've since gone through 2 different bottoms, one related to drugs. Because believe it or not, I didn't stop with alcohol. I definitely found my way into other substances pretty quickly. And then another bottom where I got sober with drinking. And what I have come to identify is that, like, and we'll talk about this no doubt, but like for me, and I think for any recovery conversation and for Christianity, these impulses, these compulsions, these addictive behaviors that I have had to enter into this work of recovery through were really massive, deeper spiritual issues. Or mental health issues I'm a depressive person. I am a self-centered person. I am someone who has, through all these various upbringing, brain chemistry, all these different environmental and physical and choices I have made, have become a kind of person who has dealt with their issues through the use of substances, right? Mm-hmm. Which didn't work out for me, as it doesn't really work out for anyone. You become dependent on that way. So that led me on a journey to bottom of its own varieties and kind of a moments of powerlessness. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And ultimately met my sponsor, Bill Lang, who passed away a couple years ago. And he was the one who got me sober. And working with him got me into this whole 12-step thing, which has been the last decade-ish of my life. So super grateful for that. But that's my journey. I'm sure we'll unpack that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think I appreciate you willing to share it. Because I know it's never fun to talk about those shadows and those dark sides of our lives, and we all have them. They come in different forms and different versions, and it is individual. I think the biggest thing is we know that all addiction starts in Ireland, right? Yeah,
it does. Point of that? I got drunk for the first time in the courtyard of a 14th century cathedral called St. Christ Church in Dublin, Ireland. Yeah. With a couple Polish dudes I didn't know, which is very unsafe behavior in a foreign country.
Absolutely. I've been there, by the way. That's random.
Yeah.
This is a random fact that I just learned about you right now.
Ireland is the cause of all my problems. That's the point. I have no ownership over it and take no responsibility for any of my actions because the nation of Ireland is the blame.
I feel like there's a song we could create there maybe someday. But so in terms of your ministry experience, well, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that journey, a little bit about the concept of what recovery actually is, because I know you've said this many times, you're still in recovery, you're active recovering every day. How come we can't ever get to this magical recovery place?
Yeah, I mean, like, and it's funny because people approach this in different, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of what Bill Wilson wrote with the original AA, and that's kind of where you start seeing this with the rise of therapeutic language start to come about. But, it depends on the person, kind of where the reasoning that they land on the same conclusion I'm about to state, which is that there is a certain type of person for whom the use of substances of various kinds is just never going to be anything but compulsive and addictive, and they're never not going to be dependent upon it in a way that is harmful to themselves and others. Now, what's interesting is I think a lot of people, especially early in the rise of this recovery stuff, would point to a genetic disposition. Right. I think the original AA calls it an allergy to alcohol, where we have a different physiological, biological response to these depressants, to these various stimulants, whatever drug of choice it is for you. I think what's interesting for me is I've never been, I believe that, to be clear. I believe there's a genetic component to addiction. I think that's undeniable when you look at like the way alcoholism runs rampant down a family line. There's got to be something biological passed down by this, even though they haven't really identified what that is yet. I think for me, it's simpler than that. It's pragmatic and it's experiential. It's just like what I have learned without a shadow of a doubt is that when I use X, alcohol, weed, any drug, name it, Y happens. And Y is not good. Y is compulsive usage, destructive, self-destructive behavior, unhealthy mental state, a worsening of my character defects, a shattering of my relationships. So for me, it's just this recognition that like I have learned through experience, and much of it more than I'd like to admit, that this is just never going to be a healthy thing for me to do. And that my posture towards it may be it's when I would even say like maybe there is like a magical potion that I could take, and someone says like, oh, and then you can drink healthily. Like I still probably wouldn't, because at the end of the day, I have learned without a shadow of a doubt that when I do this, bad things happen. So why would I just like keep taking poison, even if someone was like, but this time I have a way to fix the poison and it won't hurt you anymore, right?
That's really well said.
For me, it's as simple as that. It's like, this is poison for me. So what recovery basically as a practice is it starts with that recognition of I cannot use blank. And there's more to it, which I know we'll dive into, but from that recognition of powerlessness, I cannot use this anymore. I'm not like other people. This is destructive for me. You go on a lifelong journey of basically decoupling yourself from the internal spiritual dimensions, causes of what has led you to abuse that substance in the first place. And that's what recovery really is. It's a deeper dive into the self in which you start uprooting and weeding out and going through a transformation to basically heal from whatever has led you to feed that addiction. And it is lifelong, again, because like whether it's genetic or dispositional or whatever else, like I just know beyond a shadow of doubt that I am never not going to have an unhealthy desire to abuse these substances.
It's really well said.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And in all seriousness, I think there is a component of just raw honesty that I just want to give space to the listener just to take a second just to comprehend that and think through that, because it's a lot when you hear it for the first time, or maybe you've heard it 100 times, but hopefully if somebody is struggling, and we'll talk about that at the very end,
sure.
How to get some help and support. In your ministry experiences, what are some of the items that we put in place of drugs per se, or alcohol when it comes to unhealthy addictions? I think there's a multitude of lists of things, but what have you seen in terms of, this is not just about drugs and alcohol, this is about lots of other things that we're considering.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the point I was kind of making previously, but I think the major misconception of recovery, especially like AA, is that this is about the substance. And that's actually not true, even in the literature of AA and NA. Only step 1 and step 12 of Alcoholics Anonymous mentions alcohol. The other 10 steps are about what is going on beneath that behavior, because like ultimately what the recognition that you need to come to as an addicted person is that what is the substance is merely like an outward expression, or like this surface layer expression of a much deeper spiritual issue, though it is causing making it impossible for you to deal with that spiritual issue. I think that's why you have to get sober before you can start doing the spiritual work of recovery, is that at the end of the day, this is your primary crutch from avoiding those other issues, these deeper problems of mental illness, of emotional fragility, brokenness, of rampant spiritual unhealth, whatever that is. But again, maybe we attached ourselves to that substance to deal with those things, to pick up that specific crutch because of a genetic issue. But at the end of the day, like, this is not actually the problem. You have to get this out of the way to start getting to the problem. But at the end of the day, your real problem is not that you drink, it's that you're constantly afraid. And when you get afraid, you can't control things. And you can't control things, you get angry. And you repeat this cycle over and over and over again. And it breaks the relationships you're in, and it leads you to drink compulsively, and it leads you to escape or whatever. And you can name 1,000 different things, from anxiety to self-centeredness to what we in recovery called character defects, or defects of character. And ultimately, I think that's what makes recovery valuable in a ministry setting beyond just working with alcoholics and drug addicts, is that once you have it in that framework, which is like what it's really about, is coming to terms with our powerlessness over like our internal compulsive behaviors, thought processes, attitudes, postures towards other people, thoughts about ourselves, comparison. And that it's about coming to admit that powerlessness, to recognize that we cannot deal with these things, these innate, ingrained brokenness, spiritual brokenness in us, that we can't deal with them on our own, that we have tried in 1,000 different ways to fill that God-shaped hole, as they often say, to fix thyself, to heal thyself. And we have failed over and over and over again. And in fact, we have usually just fed the things that we're trying to fix more and more and more.
Right. That
we come to this moment of recognizing we're powerless over these things, and for the first time in our lives, are forced to trust in something bigger than ourselves, something outside of ourselves, and to turn our will and our lives over to a power greater than ourselves, as they say in AA. And that becomes the first moment of transformation, of real transformation in your life, that you start for like the first time, as is so obvious in hindsight, admit, I do not have the answers to the problems I have created in my life. but there is one who might.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to trust them. And ultimately, like, if you take that framework of like, hey, what is the thing that you've tried to control in your life that you can't, that you're ultimately powerless over? What are the cycles that have developed from that misguided attempt to create order in a chaotic part of your world or whatever? What are those internal struggles that you've tried to wrestle with that you can't heal by yourself, that are leading you to make a mess of your personal life and relational life? And in that mission of powerlessness, you come to trust something outside of yourself to actually heal in those areas. Man, that's like all good ministry, right? So what does that look like in terms of, I think your question was like, what are some other ways that people act on that and come to that recognition? Well, I've seen it in 1,000 different ways. I've seen it with spending. I've seen people use money in that way. I have worked with people who gamble. I have worked with people who have that with sex. I have people who have that same desire and that compulsiveness with judgmentalism, anger, pride. Like in some ways, I'm grateful that mine is substance, because like it's easy for me to have started this journey. It was obvious what my problem was. But there are people who are equally as addicted to codependency who are never going to have their life get bad enough for them to realize that they are an addict to unhealthy relationships, right?
Right. Well said.
Or what Richard Rohr in Breathing Underwater, his book on recovery and Christianity, calls stinking thinking, which is our own habitual way of seeing the world. I look at our political sphere, and I bet you're going to find a whole lot of people addicted to their stinking thinking and their worldview who just cannot get outside of it.
Absolutely, 100%.
That was a rant, but yeah.
No, it was a beautiful rant, and I think it really outlines kind of the concepts of this. I remember I was at a conference with it was Wheaton College professor who had a PhD in theology and a PhD in biochemistry, and his whole point, he made this beautiful sermon about substances and how we're so substance laden in the 21st century, and we have so many options to fill this God-sized hole. We'll talk about it in a minute. That he turned the whole room around when we all thought he was talking about alcohol. In fact, he was talking about caffeine. Yeah, and and our worship services, if we took away coffee,
oh my gosh, it'd be a riot.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, the fires in the worship center, and people hurting each other in the commons.
Yeah, pagans burning the streets.
We can't take away. But caffeine is a substance.
Yeah, sure.
That you didn't mention Diet Coke, but I drink too much Diet Coke.
It's not my job to tell you have a problem.
Hey, but that's the thing is there's moments where we are all facing addictive moments in our lives and all needing recovery in different forms and different versions. And so I think that the temptation is someone will click on this and stop listening after 1 minute. But if you're still listening, all people, I think, have this process of recovery and the process of healing in their lives.
Well, I think real quick, and just jump in. I mean, my sponsor always used to say, basically look for any time that you cannot accept reality as it is, and you're going to find some level of addictive behavior or addictive mindset playing out, regardless of who you are. And I think when you frame it that way of like, hey, if that deeper problem is there's something in my life that I can't change. Like at the end of the day, if I got real, I'm like, I can't control that thing. And yet I obsess over it. And I think about it all the time. And I'm constantly trying to manipulate other people and myself and my world to make what I want to happen in that space come true. And which, when you say that out loud, you're like, that sounds really gross. But again, all of us are doing that all the time with these things that we cannot control because we can't accept reality as it is.
Right.
And that's just a form of escapism. And we're using, again, that may not be a substance, but your belief that you can make your wife into the person that you want her to be, and your delusion of self that you are somehow able to control other people or to get what you want from other people because you just can't accept them as they are. Like, these are the pattern, like the foundational patterns of addictive behavior. And if you think you're not an addict, like, stop trying to control other people for like a week and see if you start getting jonesy, because I think you probably will. Yeah, because it's going to be like, man, I don't think I can be this present all the time, or this accepting, or this open-handed. It's so. Anyways, just meant to jump in. I think when you frame it outside of the substance towards those spiritual problems, it becomes very easy to realize that we all struggle with this.
Absolutely, and it explains why I only drink Diet Coke at church when I'm dealing with the likes of you.
That's right.
I need to control you.
And you can't. because I've gone through recovery.
Let's change gears a little bit. So Augustine was this amazing, call him the church doctor.
I think I heard of him once.
You've heard of him once, probably in your seminary
I think
classes.
they mentioned him in seminary.
Around 400 AD, he writes this beautiful work, and he uses it as a self, what's that called? A autobiography. Well, I can't talk all of a sudden. We're gonna keep going.
They're gonna say self-help.
I was gonna say self-help too. I don't know why.
Book.
But
How to Church for Dummies.
In his early life, he was an addict and he abused women, and he was addicted to several substances. And even in the 400s, they had that in massive supply in the Roman Empire. And Augustine wrote this more as an exercise of the soul to understand who and how he's become who he has become, and that part of his identity was wrapped up in those bad choices, those unhealthy choices, and also the recovery from those, and becomes the most famous writer of Christian thought for, I would say, a good 1,000 years.
Sure.
It's not until probably Martin Luther where we see someone kind of at his level in terms of his contemporary standards of what he has done. And it's through this he believes that everyone has a God-sized shaped hole in their heart, and we have this hole in our figurative heart where we try and put things like alcohol, drugs, money, sex, whatever it is, Diet Coke even, to somehow appease this yearning that we have that nothing else will fit except for God. And I think that's a part of the recovery process for me, and addictive process, that when I counsel people or looking at the mirror and looking at my shadow side, I often try to cover up perceived inadequacies in myself.
Yeah.
With something other than God, because God's too easy, right? God's not going to solve all things. It's not a good enough balm to cover my ills. But when I do finally turn back to God, I'm like, oh, this was the answer all along.
Sure.
And it's not a cure all for all things, but it's this thing we need to address first.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, is there a defined point in this process of kind of struggling between the God-sized hole and filling that with God or filling it with other substances, or is it more of a fuzzy process in your testimony when it becomes an addiction becomes more, or sorry, not addiction, a substance becomes more of a substance and an addiction, or a pattern becomes more of a pattern and then it becomes an addiction? Is there a point where that happens?
Yeah, I mean, in recovery, they always say addiction is a progressive disease, and that's a critical thing to recognize. Is very few people start out in the gutter, like from their first drink, or like a blackout drunk every time they sip alcohol. It's almost always something that builds and builds and builds, and that makes sense physically. If you're just constantly trying to chase a drunk or a high, I mean, we know this. It gets harder and harder to do those things. You build a tolerance. You need more. The more you drink or use, the more effect that this drug is having on your body in a negative sense. And now you're trying to cover over a physical decline with the same blah, blah, blah. You see how it spirals and progresses pretty quickly. So the short answer is yes, it's progressive, but there is a fuzzy line about it, because like what we're really talking about when we're talking about addiction versus we'll say abusive drinking, because there is a difference, right? There is a difference between I am someone who has a circumstantial, this season of my life, unhealthy relationship with alcohol, went through a breakup and I dabbled and got drunk too many times in a row, versus someone who I would call an alcoholic. And that difference is dependence. There is a difference between abusing something and being dependent upon something. It's a thin line. It's a hard line to identify. It's why I think recovery requires a admission from the person who is the addict or the alcoholic. It is impossible to do that, to come to that admission for anyone else. They have to come to it themselves. Because what it is it's coming to a point where it's recognizing I am dependent upon this substance to do things that it is not designed or capable of doing,
right?
To meet needs that it is not designed or capable of doing.
And I think really quick, I think for Americans in the 21st century, when something doesn't work the way we think it's intended, we just do more of it.
Absolutely.
We don't stop it. We don't consider, maybe this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
We just go faster. We go harder. We go higher. We go whatever.
Yeah. Which
works in some settings, but in this setting, it's the most awful thing to do, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's the cause of most midlife crises. I lived my entire life being like, if I got more money or I got more of this or I got more of that, and then I'd be happy. And then I hit 50 and I'm just as miserable as I was when I was 18.
Right.
And suddenly you're buying a Lamborghini and getting a second wife and ruining the lives of making everyone else miserable. Right.
Right.
Is that we all know what it's like to feed and feed and feed something because we just learned, we got convinced that this is like what will fix us. And it doesn't. And instead of taking that as a lesson to try something else, we usually, as human beings with our stupid monkey brains, just try and try again, right? And that's true for the addict too. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the root of most of the character defects is like fear, for example. And it's, hey, at a young age, you learn to, and this is a really interesting point that I've come to realize myself, is that I'm going to tangent, come back to what I was about to say, but we've learned a lot of our character defects at a young age for good reasons. At a young age, I got scared of something uncontrollable in my life, and I got angry, and it made the things stop. And it was good because I was in danger, and getting angry scared off the bear. I wasn't a bear, but maybe the angry parent or the bully at school.
Right.
And we were too young to realize that has nothing to do with a pattern. So instead, what our brain started to do is it started saying, hey, when you get scared, get angry and danger goes away. Well, the problem is we got older and things got more complicated, and suddenly that little simple formula really starts making a mess of your life, because now you're afraid of more complex emotional things like your wife leaving you. And every time you get that sense from her, you yell at her and you get angry. And guess what? It actually causes the thing that you were afraid of to happen. It doesn't get you out of the danger. All to say, like, at the root of all these character defects is fear. And at the root of a lot of alcoholics is dealing with some sort of fear with a substance that helps them not feel that fear anymore, but that's not actually resolving the issue. It's creating a dependence on the thing to not feel a feeling, to experience something negative, but it's not resolving anything. So really, it's just giving you a fake reprieve from something that you're running away from, just long enough for you to get sober and then feel it all over again and then need another drink. And suddenly, again, we're coming back to where we started. That means you're dependent upon that thing to do something that it is incapable of doing, which is resolving your fear, filling that God shaped hole, making you a healthy, fixing you, right? And you can replace that with anything. Being fun at parties, being the kind of person you like, being someone who women want to talk to you, like all these things that alcoholics tell themselves that alcohol is doing for them, that it's actually not, but that they have become dependent on their head of the substance is like make them capable of doing. Yeah,
that back brain kind of thinking versus your front brain, higher level thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember always thinking through that God-sized hole. Lily was a little infant, maybe 1 or 2, and she had that little game where you had the triangle and you try and put in the triangle hole. The square and the square hole. Yeah. And she just had this, I can't remember what shape it was, but I mean, just trying to slam that in there. And then I'm going to meet with adults and they're talking about these complex ideas and issues that they're having. I'm like, you're just like little infant Lily trying to slam this thing that does not fit. And somehow in your brain, you believe it will. And it just astounds me how stupid we all are. To be very blunt.
Well, and Richard Rohr always says that the last thing the ego wants to do is to change. Like the ego would rather die than to change. And that is what we're running into there, is like most of us, whether we admit it or not, are just so convinced that we see the world correctly, that we know best for ourselves, to the point that like we will actively reject wisdom for the sake of just not having to change. I remember I was talking to Bill Lang early in recovery. He was trying to get me to wake up I've told the story on stage, but he was trying to get me to wake up at like 5 a.m. because he says you need to meditate. If you have any chance of staying sober, you're going to have to start your day with peace, because when the world gets chaotic, you need to have found peace to return to peace. Like if you wait to meditate until it's noon, you've already gone through, like your boss has yelled at you, your girlfriend's mad at you, you've gotten into an argument on Facebook with someone, and then you try to find peace, like for the first time that day, you got no shot, right? You're already going to be sideways. So he's like, you got to meditate. And I was arguing with him because I was at this point waking up at 7, eating like a candy bar, drinking a Dr. Pepper on the way to work, getting there at 7:55 just in time to use the bathroom on company time, right?
Yep. Sounds like many people's lives right now.
I just didn't want to wake up early.
My best one.
I really didn't want to wake up. And I have this person who is 20 years into the life I want to live. He is like 20 years of recovery, and he's telling me this is something I have to do. And here I am arguing with this person about why I'm the only alcoholic and drug addict who doesn't, in fact, have to do that. And he stopped me and he said, Mike, do you agree that you hit rock bottom? And I was like, yes, Bill, obviously. That's why I'm putting up with your bull crap, right?
Yep.
And he said, I need you to understand that your best thinking got you there. And this is the mistake we all make. We all tell ourselves that like when we really make a mess of our lives, that like it was a mistake, it was circumstance, we had no part in it, or even if we admit we had a part in it, it was like a flaw in the system. Like, my thinking is fine, but I just made one mistake. When at the end of the day, for most of us who hit a rock bottom, we thought every step along the way to hell was the right thing for us, was going to lead to the best results. Like, our way of thinking, what's between our ears, was like, do this, do this, do this. This is going to work out. This is going to work out. This is going to, again, take that drink. It's going to make you more cool. It's going to make you more, all the way to like the gutter. And what you have to come to admission of is like, again, I don't have the answer to my problems. Just like Augustine. I have been just like your daughter. I have been trying to shame this circle into a square hole, and I need something outside of myself to be like, bro, you got the wrong piece. Yeah. Because I'm never going to figure that out on my own. Because my ego just doesn't want to.
Absolutely. Well, it's that both cognitive but also just soul struggle. Of figuring out who the best version of myself that God's calling me to be and transformed to be. And I'll find myself, I will have my anger back brain flared many times a day by many different things. It could be on the road, it could be at work, it could be at home, it could be in the middle of the night when the dog jumps on me. Yeah, and
Jason just says anything, and I'm just like, oh, that guy, God.
The greatest podcast editor in the history of podcast editing. Can't believe him doing such good work.
When he's not breaking our cameras.
That's right. with
I think I heard him fall again.
Just what I found is helpful for me, and you can catch me at times, is I say it out loud, just 3 small sentences. It's okay. I'm safe.
Yeah.
And for me to hear my own voice say that, just takes down the emergency brain that there's a lion, fire, or stranger in my room that's not there.
Yeah.
But my brain believes it, and let's then try to manipulate it with extra substances, with another Diet Coke, with whatever it is. It is a struggle for all of us, and we have to find both the 5 a.m. mentoring, or not mentoring, the 5 a.m.
Yeah, he shut up my house and he said, meditate.
Meditating time, not mentoring. And also those little strategies that help keep you in the right headspace throughout the day.
Yeah, and I love that too. Just real quick, I love the phrases that get stuck in your head, because for mine, it was Bill. I could still hear him all the time. I'll start getting sideways. I'll get anxious about something. I start getting obsessed with something, trying to control something, and I'll just hear him say in the back of my head, there are no big deals. He said that to me all the time. And that used to make me so mad, because I'd be like pissed off about something at work or this or that. And I'd be like, the world's falling apart. And obviously he would say this to make you realize, like, you're using in these destructive behaviors and thought processes and emotional patterns are coming from this idea that you're like outsizing, you're wrong sizing something in your life. You're making, in the grand scheme of the cosmos, some minor argument in just like a world shattering event, which is going to lead you to respond to it incorrectly, or to try to numb it, or to try whatever. And I just hear him over and over, Mike, there are no big deals. Grand scheme of the universe, there just aren't. Breathe it out. You know what I mean? Suddenly, he's right. Most of us, 99% of us, are never going to have anything that will be the world at stake decision in our lives. And many of our unhealthy responses to the problems in our lives are because we think they are that thing. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
Instead of just taking a deep breath, getting present, and being like, all I can do is my best, and there are no big.
That's good.
Yeah.
Tell me about how your past has hampered your testimony, and sometimes has strengthened your testimony.
I mean, I think, disclaimer, I don't know, like, I would push against any of the dualism of something like that. I think it's all kind of inseparable.
Well, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah,
that needs to be said.
And in a sense, like, what we're really talking about here is like how people respond to my life. Because at the end of the day, I can't have become the pastor I am today, or the husband, or the father, without having gone through the bad stuff too. And this is, again, a big part of recovery, is just coming to accept it all, which is like, there is no like universe. It's an unreality to think that I could have become me without all of it, that I could just go through and like erase the things I don't like and just been like, still become a person that is like who I am. That's just not true. The good and the bad, the ugly, it all belongs, is kind of one of those things that you have to come to accept. But it does impact how people respond, for sure. I mean, I would say it's hampered me and some of the audiences. There are people who just like do not want a pastor who is a recovering addict, period. It's just messy. It's I once heard a person at a church meeting say like, well, and they didn't even know I was an addict. They're talking about another person in leadership, and they were like, my ex-wife was an addict or an alcoholic, and I could never trust her because she could relapse any moment. So we can't trust someone in a church leadership to be that, because we can never know if they're just gonna. And it's like, and I was like, one, you're done to say probably their judgmentalism, sir. but yeah, so like there is a people who live in this black and white framework who would never be able to accept or even take ministry from someone like me. Which is not to say that there isn't another part of this that is mine to own too, which is that it's, and this is again where it's a universal thing that is just exasperated in an addict, which is that if you are an addict, an alcoholic, because these are deeper spiritual issues and deeper unrealities and these deep-seated character defects, like of course that bled into my ministry and how I treated people at church and how I understood relationships and to how I was a husband or a father or whatever, like, and they still do after I quit using, like, after I quit drinking. It's a lifelong process of me shrinking those character defects that got me to bottom. I didn't just suddenly stop having anger issues. I didn't just suddenly stop being self-centered. Like, you know what I mean? Those things have shrunk. I've identified them, I'm able to work on them, give them to my higher power, experience transformation in them. But of course, like that, the whole point of like recovery to some extent is to realize that this behavior that you think is like compartmentalized into like this little box in your life is actually bled everywhere and is like touched everything, and you have to go through and uproot it from like every part of your life. So anyways, I'll say like when we talk about my testimony, of course there is like stuff that I have to own about like it wasn't the most like self-honest pastor or the most humble pastor or whatever. But it's also strengthened it, because I think the biggest answer I would give there is like empathy. Like you want to know the best pastors are the ones who have been through some stuff, and it's because they have at least to some degree, and I'm not trying to toot my own home, that some degree have come face to face with their own powerlessness. So they're not trying to control people. They're not trying to like use you to complete some sick ego journey. Like they've to some extent come to a recognition of powerlessness. And usually to some extent they've come to a level of open-handedness and trust, right? And empathy, where they can recognize like, I'm not here to control this person. I'm not here to judge this person. I have no basis to judge this person because I am just like, I'm the worst of sinners. Like,
right. I love that verse, by the way.
Yeah. And like you do reach into a good pastoral space of just like, my only job is to love this person, to see them as a human being, to treat them as I wish I had been treated, and to hopefully like basically do what I can to help them and trust my higher power with the rest, who has already proven in my own life to do the things that I cannot do. And probably I'm going to trust that they can help the person the same way they've helped me. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. Yeah.
But that's been a big thing. I think the other more tangible thing is I also think recovery has helped me discover spiritual disciplines at an age far younger than most people, which has been pretty cool. Getting into things like meditation in my mid-20s and an experiential relationship with God rather than just an intellectual one,
right.
Has been no doubt helpful. But ultimately these things are intertwined. I have character defects that have come from my addiction that have touched every part of my life and still do. I have wonderful growth that has come from my character defects, my addiction that touched all of my life and still does. And they have helped me be a pastor. They have hampered me from being a pastor, and ultimately it all.
Yeah. I think we call that a paradox.
Yeah.
Or paradox.
Oh. Mighty Ducks?
Paradox.
What's your favorite duck movie?
None. Although there are quite a few that you can choose from.
There's more than you expect.
Yeah, no, oh wait. No, because
it's like donkey stories in the Bible.
Oh my gosh, we have to do that. So many donkeys. I really appreciate what you shared there, and I think the way in which you've illustrated how your process of sobriety, your process of recovery, has impacted several different types of people along the way. And sometimes, those Venn diagrams where it's I'm both a father, a husband, and a pastor to these people who I'm living with, and so the Venn diagram kind of is messy at times.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that recovery and addiction affects all sorts of people. It's not just the person.
Yep.
And coming from some experience there, I'm not going to share, but there's just ways in which there's an unseen casualty in a lot of addictive behavior and a lot of in recovery as well. That there's an untold amount of recovery that happens not just with the person, but with all the people connected to that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. So, in your point of view, where do addictions have stereotype of being another's problem? And where do we need to configure how our society enables some but villainizes others? It's a kind of a two-sided question there.
Yeah.
With that in mind.
I think it's a really good point. And I would also just like say, like, if I can laugh at myself, like me, much like most addicts and alcoholics are so self-aggrandized that somehow we become the heroes of the story, even though, like you said, we've left relational wreckage in our path. And there's plenty of people who deserve more attention, who I have hurt than I do, right, and care. And this is a problem with a lot of charismatic people. Sight of those harmed by those who are being redeemed, and it's weird. It's like I wish we could
kind of like almost like you celebrate Paul, but you forget about all the people around Paul.
You forget about oh my gosh, we just did a series on him, Stephen.
Yeah,
right. And we are so excited, and then even Stephen becomes just like this weird footnote in Paul's great story of right. like exaltation, and you're like, yeah, he murdered that guy, right? And
I always find it funny, Luke travels with Paul on so many of his journeys because the pronouns change from he to we, and I'm just like, but Luke doesn't toot his own horn. He just loves the ministry that Paul does, and it makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, he did amazing things, and so it's a paradox again.
Yeah,
you are doing the hard work, and it does affect others.
Well, yeah, and I just want to shout that out. Also, I want to shout out that, like, as a church, we do want to be a space that loves the addict. I mean, that's why I'm here. But we also want to be a space that's always looking to help the family members and those hurt by them too, because I just think it's kind of like in youth ministry where the good kids can get forgotten because we pour all of our time and energy to the kids who are really troubled. And you're just like, I mean, it is good to care for troubled children, but you also don't want, like, the kid who's just doing great to have no love being poured into them because they had the misfortune of doing things well, and not ruining their lives and the lives of those around them, Right. And that's just hard. That's just a hard thing. So I just wanted to shout that out. I think in terms of the question, for yourself, again, it just comes back to a lack of empathy. I mean, we have such a problem with this in the world. It's a human condition problem, but it's certainly, because the church is a power structure and a social structure, it's certainly seeped into the church, which is that we just love created boundaries, bounded sets about, like, things that we don't have problems with, right? Like, our problems are acceptable because we are a majority and we suffer from them, and thus we can get together and justify them and feel like we don't need to change. And then even more secure in our self-righteousness by demonizing the 5% of people who have problems that are not like us. I mean, this is what sexuality has been in the church for a great amount of time. It's like we're all sitting here in America. We're greedy. We're violent. We support wars. We are destroying the environment. We're engaging in all these corporate complicit sins that are devastating to the poor, the marginalized, and everyone Jesus has ever instructed us to care for. And yet we're able to be comfortable as Christians, complicit in those behaviors because we can go, well, at least we aren't doing that.
Right.
And it's a much less harmful to the world thing that we've deemed to be a sin, and I bring up sexuality, but it's any number of things.
Absolutely.
Divorce. I mean, it could be smoking weed. Like, again, something that, like, at the end of the day is just something that we aren't personally doing, that we can create an other out of, and that other and our demonization of it allows us to be comfortable in our own complicity.
Well said.
So all to say, like, stereotypes, I think we just need to be constantly thinking about, like, who are we villainizing, and, like, actually taking time to, like, investigate that. Why are we villainizing this person? As the enemy, quote unquote, what are we getting out of labeling them as such? What psychically are we gaining, comfort wise, emotional, again, validity, whatever you want to say, self-justification, self-righteous, like, what are we gaining by labeling them as such and then, like, attacking them as such? And I just think most Christians, like, never investigate their own scapegoating in that way, because usually they're going to come to a mirror of some sort where they go, actually, the reason I'm doing this, I don't want to face this thing in myself. The reason I want to villainize the addict is I don't want to admit that I'm addicted to power, political power, to self-righteousness, to judgmentalism, to pride, to self-esteem, to money, to sex, to whatever. Again, judgmentalism seems to be a big one. Mm-hmm. What am I getting out of this? Because there is something. And I think that when we can get rid of this hero and villains nonsense, we get to a point in which we recognize that we're all broken just in these different ways. And I think that becomes the pathway of true like empathy and then communal transformation. But anyway, that was kind of convoluted, but that's kind of where my head goes. Is it just is easy for us to create a them to attack, to avoid looking at us, right?
No, and I think the idea of the hero villain, the dualism that's ever present in our society, that there's winners, there's losers, there's good, there's bad.
Yeah.
I think it's key to say, like, we are all in this beautiful mess of life together. And so in that kind of segue, what do you recommend for those or they may have loved ones who are struggling in any of these areas we've identified? How can we help assist those who need assistance in this time?
Man, that's tough. Richard Rohr says that the only thing that leads us to truly change is great love, but more often great suffering. And boy, that's a sad bummer. And that's kind of like the thing, you know, I want to say to like anyone struggling with addiction that like you're not alone. Reach out, ask for help, go to a meeting, like be in a group of people who, unlike what you have probably been the majority of your life, understand what you're going through and have grown and come out the other side of it. And you will find hope. Like, you may feel hopeless, but like, I swear, go to any AA meeting and you're going to find a sense of hope just by listening to these people.
And I think too, like to clarify for those who've never been to an AA meeting, it is not what your brain thinks it is. It is always going to be different. It's always beautiful and good. And there's all sorts of different types and demographics and places. It is not what you think it is.
It's so much better than you think it's going to be. And it's so much more open and honest and loving. And yeah, it's just a bunch of people who want to see you get well. And that's so cool. It's what church should be, quite frankly.
Amen.
But so I want to like start there, but like at the end of the day, that desire is something that that person needs to come to for themselves. Usually through great suffering again. And that kind of leads me to like who I want to address even more than that person, because so much of that is an internal decision for them, is those who are struggling with an addict. And the hard truth is that usually wherever there's an addict, there's a codependent. There is someone who is enabling that behavior, who is trying to fix that person when they can't. And the hardest conversations I have to have as a pastor is with loved ones of addicts, and just being like, just going to have to let that person suffer more. You just are going to have to find a way to set boundaries, to hold those boundaries, to detach, to love them, but at the same time, not enable them, not feed into their cycles of behavior, not destroy yourself trying to fix someone that you can't fix. Only God can fix that. Well, at least what's gone wrong in this person's heart and mind. And being supportive and basically making it so you are open-handed, but also present enough that when they do want help, you can step in and point them to the right places, which is not you. That's the other hard part, is like you walk with them to them, but even when they are ready to change, they need to go to someone who is not their codependent to get well. And that's very hard for spouses in particular, to be like, even when your husband is ready or your wife is ready, they're going to have to go. I've literally seen people get jealous about this, of like, why didn't you want to change for me? And that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of like what has taken place inside this person. It's not about you, and they need something from outside of you, because if you could have solved their problems, you would have done it by now. And you can't. So anyway, that's what I would say to them is, again, boundaries. That's a big one. The biggest one is you also need to get help and get some voices from outside of your relationship with this person to help you figure out what those boundaries are, where the unhealth is, and how to, in a safe way, be in a relationship with this person, if you can be, as you encourage them to get help.
That's really well said. I'm going to say something that's going to sound like Christianese, but is meant out of authenticity and no joking aside. I do think, and I've experienced this as personally, I think this is where prayer really can be a huge transformative piece. And you know, as good Christian pastors, we probably should not forget prayer. But I've seen prayer not as some sort of magic formula where you get an 8-ball response from God, that, you know, go do this, go do that. It is prayer that will, sometimes God prompts you in ways that just seem very crazy to our society standards on how to maybe walk away from relationships or get into relationships and be present with people through God just kind of prompting you. But I've also seen prayer just bring that peace of being willing to accept the uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And I just thought, as we're just sitting here listening and talking through this, and such a topic as this, if we could maybe close out this episode with a prayer.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be cool.
And we didn't plan this at all, so I'm just kind of being led by the Spirit at this point. Do you want to pray together? Do you want to pray you or me or?
How about you do it?
Okay, let's do it. Is that okay?
Yeah, you silky sound of your voice. Take us away.
Heavenly Father, we thank you just for being a God who is so big and does not only control, but you've created and you will redeem all things. And you give us the opportunities to enjoy a world that you've made, that sin has corrupted, but you have restored and are continuing to build your kingdom through large and small ways in each and every person who's not only in this room, who's mixing this podcast, but who's listening and in this city and this entire planet, that you have put us in here for reasons that we sometimes can see and sometimes we cannot. And the ways in which we sometimes corrupt our testimonies with outside sources, trying to fill a need that only you can fulfill and sustain. God, I pray that you would just redeem us and restore us on who we should turn into versus who we would like to become. And that you have a plan and you have a desire to see us in relationship with you, in relationship with all these other people who we come into contact with each and every day of our lives. And I pray that you would just even put someone in our heart, someone in our eyes, maybe a name in our ears that we could reach out to and find this path towards not only reconciliation through redemption, but through recovery. God, I'm grateful for my friend Mike, for the way in which you have brought him on this journey and that you have used him in so many huge ways and will continue to do so in bringing healing and recovery in so many people's lives. We ask your blessing upon all those who would hear this prayer, upon all the listeners and watchers. We say a blessing upon them and upon all of us to find recovery in you. In your name, amen.
Keep coming back. It works if you work it. That's one for those who know.
If you've enjoyed this episode, we got some more coming out very soon.
Yeah, much lighter topics. We're getting into politics next.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And then after that is
Christian nationalism.
But after that is strange stories from the Bible. So
yeah,
that'll be much more playful.
Much more fun. Yeah.
I'm excited for that one in particular. But for all of you listening, we want to say thanks and for watching. It's not just listening, we're watching. This is 2024. This isn't 1894.
Yeah.
Was there radio in 1894? Okay. We only know the planet sizes. With all that,
and even then, just barely.
With all that in all seriousness, hope you have a great day, whatever day it is, whatever time you're listening. And whether you're in the pulpit or out of the pulpit, be used and be blessed by God. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Out of the Pulpit. If you're interested in more about Element 3 Church, becoming a Christian, or a Centered Set Church, please visit us and contact us through element3.org. Thanks and have a great day.